Welcome to Teaching Tuesdays, where I play and you learn about some of history's coolest moments. So let's jump in. When we think of Japan, one burning image usually comes to mind. Samurai. A fierce warrior in armor, carrying a katana, bound by honor, serving his lord and standing as one of the great symbols of Japanese history. And if you've had the privilege of playing the Ghost of Tsushima, that image is everywhere. The game is set in the year 1274 AD, during the first Mongol invasion of Japan. And we see the samurai clans, warrior lords, codes of loyalty, and a society where military families are responsible for defending the land. But how did Japan get here? This is the story of the rise of the samurai. To understand the rise of the samurai, we need to start before they were the ruling class. For much of early Japanese history, power centered on the imperial court. During the Heian period, which was from 794 to 1185, the capital was in modern-day Kyoto. This is a world of court rank, ceremony, poetry, aristocratic families, and imperial politics. Everything you'd imagine from an imperial leader with heavy religious ties. The emperor was the symbolic center of authority. But, in actuality, powerful noble families often controlled the government. The most famous of these families was the Fujiwara clan, who became masters of court politics. They gained influence by marrying into the imperial family, controlling regencies, and dominating the bureaucracy, which might sound familiar. In this world, the ideal man was not a hardened warrior. He was refined. He was familiar with poetry, etiquette, calligraphy, court ritual, and politics. This doesn't mean that warfare didn't exist, it absolutely did. But status and culture was found in the court, not on the battlefield. The royal court could make laws, issue titles, and claim authority. But Japan wasn't just Kyoto. Across the countryside were provinces, estates, local disputes, local rebellions, bandits, tax problems, and powerful families who had their own interests and problems. And the further you got from the capital, the harder it became for court officials to actually enforce any power, something seen in medieval Europe as well. Court rank was not enough. People needed men with weapons who could enforce the law. The early samurai did not suddenly appear as some romantic sword-wielding heroes. They developed as provincial warriors. Many were connected to local landholding families, some served aristocrats, some protected estates, some enforced tax collection, and some fought bandits or even rival clans. Over time, this military skill became a source of real power, not just a symbolic power. If you controlled the land, you needed someone to defend it. If you wanted taxes collected, well, you needed someone to enforce it. If a rival family challenged your claim, well, you needed armed men to protect that too. And if the royal court in Kyoto couldn't protect your estate, you had to form your own protection. And this is the bedrock the samurai grew out of. Early samurai warfare was not originally centered on the katana either. In the early medieval period, mounted archery was extremely important. Samurai were elite warriors who often fought from horseback using the bow. Sure, the katana mattered, but the bow and the horse were major symbols of early warrior status. This is important because the samurai were not just guys with swords. They were a developing military class tied to land, family, service, and loyalty. And once these warrior families became useful, powerful people in the capital started to rely on them more and more. And that reliance eventually changed Japan.
On sturdy ground we retreat.
As provincial warriors grew more powerful, certain warrior families became deeply connected to imperial politics. Two of the most important were the Taira and the Minamoto. Both clans had prestigious origins. Both were connected to the imperial family in different ways, and both became military powerhouses. At first, these warrior clans were not deep in court politics, they were just serving it. They fought on behalf of court factions, they defended interests, and they settled disputes that the aristocrats couldn't really settle with words alone. But this created a dangerous situation. If the court increasingly depended on warriors to decide political conflicts, then the warriors were no longer just servants, they were becoming kingmakers. In the mid-1100s, court politics erupted into violence. The Hogan disturbance and the Henji disturbance were the climax of this, and probably a whole new video could be dedicated just to that. But these conflicts showed that Japan's political future was now being decided by armed warrior clans. After these struggles, the Taira clan, and specifically Taira no Kiyomori, rose to power. Kiyomori was not just some battlefield commander, he became a dominant political figure. He gained court titles, placed family members in powerful positions, and even tied his family to the imperial line through marriage. But the rise created enemies, especially among the Minamoto family. And this rivalry exploded into probably one of the most important wars in Japanese history.
Calm
The great showdown between the Taira and the Minamoto clans was the Genpei War, fought from 1180 to 1185 AD. This war was one of the key turning points in Japanese history. This wasn't just a family feud, this was a struggle over who would control Japan's political future. On one side were the Taira, who had risen to dominate the court. On the other side were the Minamoto, who challenged their power. The war included famous battles, dramatic betrayals, legendary warriors, and some of the most famous stories in Japanese tradition. Eventually, the Minamoto emerged victorious, and the Taira were decisively defeated at the naval battle of Danuura in 1185. But the most important figure to come out of this conflict was Minamoto no Yoritomo. Yoritomo did not just defeat the rival clan, he changed the entire structure of the government. And this is where the samurai truly come to power. After the Genpei War, Yoritomo faced a choice. He could try to dominate the politics from Kyoto, the old imperial capital, but instead, he built his base in Kamukura, far in the east. By staying in Kamukura, Yoritomo created a government rooted in warrior society, rather than this court aristocracy. This new military government was called the Bakufu, often translated as the tent government, because of this military origins. In 1192, Yoritomo received the title shogun. Now, the word shogun had existed before, but Yoritomo turned it into something much bigger. Under him, the shogun became the head of a durable warrior government. This is the beginning of the Kamakura shogunate. The emperor still existed, the imperial court still existed too, and Kyoto still mattered, but the real power was now shared with, and often overshadowed by, the military government. Japan now had a split political structure. There was the old court in Kyoto with the emperor and the aristocrats, and then there was the warrior government in Kamukura, led by the shogun and backed by samurai families. This is not exactly like a European king replacing another king. It's much more complicated than that. The old imperial system remained, but a new military layer rose over it. The samurai had not abolished the emperor at all. They had just made themselves the people who actually controlled military power, land disputes, and warrior loyalty. So what changed under the Kamakura shogunate? The biggest change was that the warrior families now actually had official political authority. The shogunate managed networks of vassals. Samurai served their lords and received protection, status, and land rights in return. The government appointed military officials to help manage these provinces and estates. Two important roles were Shugo and the Jito. The Shugo were military governors, responsible for policing and military affairs in the provinces. You might think of them as like dukes. The Jito were estate stewards, often involved in managing land, collecting dues, and enforcing authority on estates, similar to counts in the European sense. These positions gave warriors real influence throughout Japan. The samurai were no longer just some hired muscle, they were now the backbone of governmental power. This brings us back to The Ghost of Tsushima. The game is set in 1274 AD during the first Mongol invasion. This is about 80 years after the Yoritomo became shogun. So, when the Mongols land on Tsushima, Japan is already living under the Kamakura shogunate. This matters because the defenders of Japan are not mainly court nobles from Kyoto, they are samurai families, warrior retainers, and local military elites. The world of Ghost of Tsushima is the result of the transformation that we just talked about. Japan had moved from a court-centered aristocracy into an age of warrior government. This is why the game is filled with clans, lords, retainers, armors, banners, this idea of loyalty and military obligation. Jin Sakai's world exists because generations earlier, warriors became powerful enough to actually rule. And this also makes the Mongol invasion especially important. The samurai had taken power by proving that they were the ones who could actually defend Japan, and then suddenly they are faced with one of the most terrifying military forces in history, the Mongol Empire. The invasion tested the elite warrior order. Could the samurai defend Japan from an enemy unlike anything they had faced before? That is the historical backdrop of the Ghost of Tsushima. The samurai of real history were not always the same as samurai of legend. When we hear samurai, we often imagine strict codes of honor, perfect loyalty, katana duels, and warriors who always fought face to face. Some of that image does have roots in history, but a lot of it was shaped later. The samurai were real warriors with real values of loyalty, reputation, family honor, and service. But they were also practical military men. They used ambushes, arrows, horses, strategy, politics, betrayal, and honestly whatever tools that helped them to survive and win. They were not simply noble duelists wandering through beautiful landscapes. They were landholders, officials, and fighters, family members and political actors, and sometimes even ruthless power players, which I believe actually makes them more interesting, not less, because the real samurai are not just legends. They are human beings living in a violent, changing political world. And that is your history lesson for this Teaching Tuesday. Let me know in the comments what you want to see next, what areas of history you want to learn more about, and hopefully we can make that become a reality. I appreciate the love on this, so please hit that like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you all next time.